Idaho education leaders are pointing out a long-standing flaw in funding the system, and those leaders have identified who has consistently been drawing the short straw of late. For years, Idaho has funded special education based on a flat percentage rather than actually calculating the need and awarding dollars based on that need. Well, the numbers are in. And Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Debbie Critchfield, says we are falling short. To make ends meet, Idaho school districts are forced to move dollars around or sometimes fill that special education funding gap with a supplemental levy. As the old saying goes, the first step in solving a problem is actually recognizing there is one. Here's Andrew Bartline.
It takes a keen eye to discern between necessary and sufficient. The key to spotting the difference is often buried in experience.
There's been some
Ashley Britton's family lives it.
Deficits in the past in the state of Idaho.
Deficits in funding, specifically for special education. Across Idaho, the current state funding formula sets aside special education funding for 6% of elementary school students and 5.5% for middle school and high school. The state calls that necessary, but there's a gap.
To fund on 6%, when we know that the reality statewide is closer to 12%, would suggest that it's not sufficient.
Ryan Cantrell is the Chief Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, and personal experience tells him funding that gap
is about $66.5 million that we can see on paper.
Is a problem.
The school district is on the hook for the rest of that money.
Sufficient funds in dollars the districts need.
I've never in all of my years in a school seen a situation where a school told a student or a family, we're sorry, we can't afford to provide your child what they need. But the question comes up in a finite system where you only have X amount of money. If we choose to meet the needs for this student, what are we not going to do over here as a result of that?
It's a documented issue the state intends to address, but it's likely an underreported problem. Outlined in this letter from the U.S. Department of Education, addressed to the Idaho State Superintendent, Debbie Critchfield, potentially exposing another deficit.
Doesn't make sense. Somebody should have seen this before.
In Idaho's special education manual, 2 tests are available to determine if a student qualifies for the resources. Idaho law says both are necessary, but federal law says only one is sufficient.
2 of my kids have dyslexia, and it is...
Ashley filed the complaint.
It was difficult to have them qualified.
The federal government's letter to the state of Idaho gives a 90-day timeline to explain the current system.
Asking the question, why do we do it this way? Is this working for Idaho students and families? And if not, what do we need to do differently?
Ultimately, to determine if Idaho's support for special education isn't just necessary, but sufficient.
I would imagine there's a lot of kids out there who are struggling in school, struggling to try to read and learn.
The State Superintendent of Public Instruction's office says they're committed to solving both of these problems. Number one, to ensure the state is correctly identifying the real number of students who need special education classes. And then the second piece of that, of course, is accurately funding those needs. However, Brian, the education budget, as you know, is decided by JFAC, which then has to be approved by the Idaho State Legislature. And also to change the language in the state's special education manual. Drum roll. Legislature again.
Legislature.
So it all comes back to the legislature.
And the $66 million gap, I mean, we talk about what they're funding is 6%. Some districts all across the state, it's 12%. But it could be higher than that, right? That require or need this special education?
Yeah, Superintendent Critchfield in a previous meeting said that I think the Salmon School District, if I'm getting that right, it's 16% of students are qualifying for special education in one way or another.
Wow.
And so that's a 10% difference in what they would be getting funding for.
There's a lot of issues there to address. All right. Thank you very much, Andrew.